Test.
Mic check 1, 2.
Good afternoon. I'm joined today by Josh Dorrell, CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. Dr. Alexia Harrist is here as well and is ready to answer questions. She won't be giving any prepared remarks. Before I began, I wanted to talk briefly about the demonstrations that have been occurring around the nation and here in Wyoming. And I want to express Wyoming's sense of sadness at the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. We watched in horror as that man died. The demonstrations that have occurred around the nation and here in Wyoming are an outpouring of the outrage that we all feel. I also want to express how extremely proud I am of Wyomingites around the state who felt it was proper and appropriate and could demonstrate peaceably, did so in Cheyenne and Laramie and Riverton, Jackson, and Casper. I also want to thank our law enforcement officers who have not had to make arrests and who have handled themselves professionally and with respect for the demonstrators. When these protests become violent and destructive, they represent criminal behavior, nothing more. Vandalism and property destruction, such as the defacing of the Wyoming GOP headquarters here in Cheyenne, those are just inexcusable. They're not part of Wyoming. They don't represent our values. What we would rather see is the peaceful, respectful demonstrations that advance a message more effectively, allow our citizens their First Amendment rights. It is just never a good thing to resort to violence. I want to thank our law enforcement community for their continued service to our citizens. And I particularly want to thank the Casper Police Department for their professionalism as they dealt with these demonstrations. True change is not something that can be implemented just by government. It needs to be heard by the people and brought forth by the people. All power in our government, in our form of government, comes from the people. If Wyoming wants to live up to its ideals as the equality state, we must do better. I want to read from our Wyoming Constitution, Article 1, Sections 2 and 3, which clearly indicate how Wyoming feels about this. Article 1, Declaration of Rights. Section 2, equality of all. In their inherent right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all members of the human race are equal. Section 3, equal political rights. Since equality in the enjoyment of natural and civil rights is only made sure through political equality, the laws of this state affecting the political rights and privileges of its citizens shall be without distinction of race, color, sex, or any circumstance or condition whatsoever other than the individual incompetency or unworthiness duly ascertained by a court of competent jurisdiction. Those are the values that I grew up in the state with, and those are the values that Wyoming stands for. I remember meeting George W. Bush, when he came to Buffalo, and I was just a young man knocking on doors as his dad ran for president. You know, he said something recently that I think is worthy of repeating. Achieving justice for all is the duty of us all. This will require a consistent, courageous, and creative effort. We serve our neighbors best when we try to understand their experience. We love our neighbors as ourselves when we treat them as equals, in both protection and in compassion. So thank you for that. I also want to provide a short update on COVID-19. As of today, we have had 709 lab-confirmed positive cases of COVID-19 in the state, with an additional 212 probable cases. There were 6 new lab-confirmed cases reported today. This is an increase of 44 new confirmed cases over the last week. The number of current hospitalizations as reported by our hospitals is 4 today. That is the lowest it has been since we began tracking hospitalizations closely in April. And I will say, for those of us that watch the hospitalization rate, worried about whether we have adequate hospitalization capacity, whether we have the right number of ICU beds, and hearing from one of my friends that we have made it certain that we have the opportunities for ICU beds, that there is an ebb and a flow to these cases that we've watched with a great deal of concern. Last week, at the end of last week, it was trending up. It's nice to hear that it's coming down. Wyoming's positive case rate, that is the percentage of tests that come back positive for COVID-19, has continued its downward trend and is currently at 3.2%. Again, this is very positive news. Our statewide COVID-19 dashboard remains unchanged, with the category of new cases continuing to be rated as concerning. The current health orders are in place through June 15th. The Department of Health will be reevaluating them next week to determine what adjustments may be needed, if any. And I want to thank those who have been visiting with us about those revisions to those orders. I'm pleased to note that the Department of Health has approved a variance to allow the Cody Night Rodeo. It was something I mentioned I was hopeful to see happen. It's nice to have both the Cody Rodeo and the Hewlett Rodeo cleared to go. We're also working on trying to make sure that our state fair and our county fairs and the great work that our kids at 4-H and FFA have done all this year can go forward. We continue to work on that, and I want to thank Dr. Harrist for her effort in this regard. At this time, I'm going to ask Josh Dorrell to come and speak about the Wyoming Business Council programs, the Business Interruption Stipend Program that is set to launch next week. So Josh, with that, good to have you here.
Thank you, Governor Gordon. As you mentioned, my name is Josh Dorrell, the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. Today I'm going to provide some details about the Wyoming Business Relief Programs. I'd like to start out by thanking our federal delegation, the governor, and the legislature for putting a large and impactful program together for small businesses throughout the state. The Wyoming Business Council is honored to play a role in executing those programs. Here's a brief tour of how we got here. On May 15th and 16th, our legislature convened a special session and passed House Bill 1004, which defined the Wyoming Business Relief Programs. On May 20th, Governor Gordon signed those bills, and the Wyoming Business Council began working on the rules, processes, and technology to deliver the first $50 million to small businesses across the state. This program is also known as the Business Interruption Stipend Program and will quickly deliver up to $50,000 grants. Again, those are grants that do not have to be repaid to small businesses across the state, giving special priority to those that were closed by state health orders and did not receive PPP from the Small Business Administration. In developing this program, we're working hard to ensure security and simplicity so that applicants can access those funds confidently and continue to focus on what's important, running their businesses. On May 29th, the Business Council Board of Directors approved those draft rules, and on June 2nd, those rules were approved and signed by Governor Gordon. In unison, the Business Council began a series of webinars intended to help businesses understand the program and begin gathering the necessary information to apply for those grants. Hundreds of businesses have already attended those webinars and will continue tomorrow and over the weeks to come to ensure the process is as smooth as possible. Please go to wyobizrelief.org to register for a webinar. That's wyobizrelief.org. Program 1 will launch on Monday, June 8th at 10 a.m. There are 3 different programs in this entire package. We'll be launching Program 1 on Monday. Here's a little bit more information. It is $50 million, and it benefits those businesses that have 50 or fewer full-time employees and has a maximum grant of $50,000 per business. This program and the applications will be taken at the website I mentioned before. Program 2 is a $225 million program that will benefit companies of up to 100 employees and has a maximum grant of $300,000. Program 3 is a $50 million program that benefits companies of any size and has a maximum grant amount of $500,000. I want to make it clear that these are grant programs. It means they don't have to be paid back, and the legislature intended it to be a very simple application process, and I want to make sure that everyone goes to that website to learn more about the program, attend a webinar, and ask specific questions. It's also important to note that you can apply to multiple programs if you meet the eligibility of those programs. And applying for one does not exclude you from another. We definitely want to make sure that this money stays in Wyoming and helps those businesses that need it most. We're going to take a quick dive into Program 1, which launches on Monday. First and foremost, the eligibility of which are those businesses that are for-profit. They must have their headquarters and or 50% or more of their primary work needs to be in Wyoming. They need to have employed 50 full-time employees or less as of March 31st, 2020. And of course, you must have incurred a loss due to COVID-19. We are going to give preference, and this was very clear in the legislation, we're going to give preference to those businesses that did not receive PPP and were closed by state health orders. That allows those businesses that might have slipped through the cracks and been impacted directly to benefit first. The application process will be 100% online and will not require complicated documentation or information to be uploaded. And there are many organizations across the state that have volunteered to help those businesses with the application process. Your local Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development organizations have been trained and are willing to help. Your local banks through the Wyoming Bankers Association are also willing to help. The Wyoming Business Alliance, the Small Business Development Center regional representatives, and of course, the Wyoming Business Council's regional directors. We're also working with the State Auditor's Office, Secretary of State, as well as the Department of Workforce Services to ensure the legitimacy of businesses to prevent fraud and make sure this program benefits the right people in Wyoming. Once the Business Council reviews a business's application and everything is in order, we'll send it to the State Auditor's Office for either check or electronic funds transfer. This collaboration amongst state agencies has been fantastic because they know how important small businesses are for our state. Again, because this program is intended to be simple, we are not asking for any detailed information to be uploaded, and there are no documents that need to be submitted. However, it's important for businesses to keep track of that so that they can use that if you are audited in the future. And there will be audits that will come down. That is part of the legislation. And we also want to let you know that the grant amount and the name of your company would appear on the state's transparency website. More than anything, we want to make sure that businesses apply for these. And we really want to call upon our partners in the communities as well as the associations across the state to promote these programs as much as possible, so nobody's missed with any of this funding. So speaking of missed with funding, I think it's time to talk a little bit about a subject that many of you are thinking about. And let's talk about that important group that's not part of Program 1, but we're working to find a way to include them in Programs 2 and 3, and that's nonprofits. We understand that they are an important part of our local economies and the fabric of our communities. And as we define the specific rules for programs, we've begun outreach to nonprofit organizations as well as legislators and community leaders to develop solutions to include this important group. As we look at these programs, specifically Program 1, it was the intent of the governor and the legislature to rapidly help small businesses in Wyoming that might have fallen through the cracks with other programs. And in just a few short weeks, the legislature, the governor, the Business Council, and Auditor's Office has put together a program to infuse our small business community with $50 million. But we've got to make sure that businesses apply. So please visit the website that you see and attend our webinar sessions to see how you can take advantage of this and other programs. Thank you, Governor Gordon, for the opportunity to serve businesses of Wyoming and to share this information today.
Thanks, Josh. And I think it's important also to note that while we're talking about nonprofit sector in the months to come, it is also not sector specific. In other words, there has been some concern that there isn't a specific ag program, but I want to encourage ag producers that if they felt those particular interruptions, and there are some that have, if you've got dry cows that you were trying to sell or something like that, they can apply to the Business Council as well. Happily, this is a program that really needs to have people apply, and we're really trying to address those specific interruptions that have occurred because of COVID-19. Turning now to another important topic, the budget. Wyoming, the most recent consensus revenue estimating group indicated, is facing the largest decline in revenue that it has ever seen. That follows after 2016 when we thought we'd seen the worst. So in 4 short years, we've seen 2 incredible declines in our revenue. The consensus revenue estimating group suggested that the losses could be well over $1 billion. A year ago, we had 30 rigs running in Wyoming. This year, we have 2, on our way to 1. We have more wells shut in. Coal production, as people know, is in decline. I'm very sad to say that some mines are going to have to idle for a while. We've also seen the impact that COVID has put on other industries in the state, such as our very important trona industry, where they've also had to reduce their amount of production. All of these things have spelled a phenomenal decline in our revenues, over $1 billion, as I say, and that means that we've got to take action. In April, I instituted a freeze and a review process on all contracts, and the freeze was on all hiring. Yesterday and today, I've communicated with all agency directors that we need to be prepared for a 20% reduction in our budget. That's 1/5. Over 1/3 of our revenues have gone, and we're talking about planning for a 1/5 reduction. And I have said that there is a multi-phased approach. The first was in April, where we slowed spending. The second is to be implemented by July 1st, which is the first steps on what we need to do to further reduce spending. There will be layoffs. There will be potentially furloughs and other things that occur. This isn't easy. And I've written my state employees. They have done a phenomenal job. Wonderful people. They've shown up through this entire crisis and done their job, sometimes on the front lines, sometimes without much support, and sometimes in the face of very angry people that are understandable, but they have maintained their professionalism. But we simply cannot afford to continue. We also know that the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group report was based on basically a month and a half of data, the worst possible data that we could ever imagine, April and the first part of March. That does mean that those data are not complete for a full year. They are early, but we have to take what they indicate quite seriously. While the stock market continues to ramp up at an unprecedented rate, going back to near where it was at the beginning of the COVID crisis, people are hurting. Small businesses have had to reduce the amount of hours that people have worked. They've had to lay off employees. We know this. We know that in Wyoming we've seen these effects, perhaps less than anywhere else in the nation because we were able to keep more of our economy open, but nonetheless we've still seen those reductions. And like any business anywhere, Wyoming has got to make the reductions and the cuts that it needs to in program and in, unfortunately, the people that are going to have to run those programs. I know this puts a lot of concern in our employees, and believe me, I'm going to do everything I can to steer us through this crisis with a minimum of impact. But it's important that I speak directly, frankly, and without trying to sugarcoat anything about the crisis that we face. That is absolutely essential, and I promise to the Wyoming people that we will be honest and direct with you. When we say that every Wyoming citizen gets about 10 times of services and what they get, what they pay in taxes because of our mineral wealth, that means that we're going to see declines in our economic activity because we're going to have to reduce our state spending. If you look at what we do in this state, already we've had to make some choices. We've closed rest areas in a number of places because we simply cannot afford them. Luckily, we're hoping that that we've done this strategically so that they are close enough to towns where people can now go in and visit those towns. There are a number of those kinds of reductions that are on the books. And I will promise to the people of Wyoming that not only will we do the cuts that are necessary, but we'll tell you what that's going to mean to your community, to the people in your community, to the services that we can provide. Things like whether we can plow our roads all night during the winter. Things like whether we'll be able to repair the buildings that the state counts on. Things like, are we going to be able to finish some of the buildings that we've started? Things like, are we going to have the same capacities to meet the people's needs? And I will, to the best of my ability, communicate that to the people of Wyoming because, quite frankly, we are in this together. We are in this together, legislature and executive branch. We have been working together to make sure we address these issues. And we are in this together, the people of Wyoming, where all the power is, in making the decisions about what's essential for Wyoming, what's really critical. How do we make sure that our state goes forward? We do not want to fall behind and become some banana republic. We want to become the great state that we have been, and we want to continue working towards economic prosperity for all people and the services that we need. This is a serious conversation, and I'm very happy that it's happening in an election year, because unlike a lot of elections where people talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, we know that if we fired every single Wyoming employee, every state employee, we would not change the course that we're on. We would be broke. We know that if we let all of our prisoners out of prison, that would be the kind of thing that would not change this particular crisis that we're facing. So stay tuned. We'll work together. And that's the last piece of what I want to talk to you about. When I say we're looking at this as a multi-phased approach, it is not we're going to do lop off an arm or lop off a leg and say we're good. It is about planning for our future. That's why it's a multi-staged approach, with our initial cuts coming in the next month, and then plans of what it's going to take to reduce it even further. I've asked my budget director to reach out and get those plans. We want to isolate the priorities and understand what those are and have that process ready so that if conditions continue to worsen in the economic front, that we're prepared, we're planned, we know how to get there. And if they improve, we haven't gone too fast, too quick. There are tremendous numbers of people in this state who work for state, who have a phenomenal wealth of knowledge about everything from oil and gas to coal to agriculture to education, all of these things. We don't want to lose what we've gained, the knowledge that people have. But we've got to face facts, and these are tough times. And I think what I'd leave you with is that my message to the legislature last January was that these are forces we're facing. We saw it here in Holly Frontier as they converted from using Wyoming crude to going to biodiesel from soy-based. The market they were trying to get to is California and Oregon. We know in Wyoming, our economy depends on what happens outside of the state. So we need our country to get back and working. But I told our legislature in January, we have the opportunity to think carefully about what our future is going to be, and we have some luxury of time to be able to think through that. COVID-19 just eliminated that luxury. Our time is now. The people that need to address this are you, and I am very glad to work with you on making this state the greatest that it can ever be. God bless you, God bless Wyoming, and God bless the United States of America. And with that, I'd be happy to take some questions.
Hi, Governor Gordon. This is
Yes, you came on loud
Hi,
and
this
strong.
this is Tom Coulter with the Tribune Eagle. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I was just wondering. So
Now I can't hear you.
I think there's an echo. Is it better now?
Yeah, and Michael, if you can kind of trace. Thanks.
So last week during the Revenue Committee meeting, can you hear me? I hear.
I can. You've got a big echo, though, don't you? Committee?
Yes, some members desire for the governor's office to provide some guidance on revenue-raising options, and I was wondering if there are any specific revenue-raising options that you think the state should pursue first.
Well, we are looking at all options because we know we can't cut our way out of this crisis. And I have been working with the legislature to consider the revenue options they've had. I've gone back to the last time we had a crisis similar to this, and Governor Geringer at the time had spent his time going around the state as chair of the Joint Appropriations Committee explaining the structural challenges we've had, and that eventually resulted in the Tax 2020 plan. I think this is a conversation. I can't raise revenues just on my own. That's a conversation that has to happen with the Joint Revenue Committee and ultimately the legislature. But, obviously one of the things that I think we should start with is all the tax exemptions. Maybe they should just be eliminated. And we can work through those piece by piece and see what's valuable for the state and the economy coming forward. There are other options out there on the table, but I think we start with where we've given up in the normal sales tax with the exemptions, because every time you do an exemption, you create some sort of distortion in the market, and I think it's very important that we have a very clean and clear economic enterprise opportunity sort of set of challenges. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
Next question.
Oh, hey there, Governor Gordon. This is Nick Reynolds from the Casper Star Tribune. I know you began today's comments with a nod to some of the demonstrations that had happened around the state, and was just curious, watching those play out, did you have any specific thoughts about those? And also wondering what, if any, policy solutions at the state level would you support to respond to the concerns of those protesters?
Nick, thanks for that question, and it's much more than a nod. I think it's an important time for our country to listen carefully to what we're hearing out there. Our nation was built on people who expressed their visions of the future, what they were upset with, and how they wanted to go forward. And so I got to say that I'm listening carefully. As I said, I'm very proud that Wyoming citizens felt that it was safe to be able to go out and express their opinions. I think that's a healthy and important part. I think that we as a state need to acknowledge exactly what our Constitution says, and equality is something that we've got to address. I think all people should feel included, and I plan to work with the legislature if there are specific things we need to do to strengthen. I know there's a couple that are out there. I'm willing to listen to those.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Governor, this is Bob Beck at Wyoming Public Radio. Can I go back and ask you a little bit more about the taxes? Are you going to take a very active role and push these guys? Because, as you might have known, the Revenue Committee talked about it and really didn't want to go forward with a lot of things. They want to do cuts first. It does seem to me that you're probably going to have to do revenue sooner rather than later. So will you push on that?
Yeah, Bob, thank you for that question. And let me say that first off, I think it's important that, and I've said this, for the last several years, it's important that we start with a real appreciation of, are we getting to bone? Are we really hurting? I think of a place like Thermopolis. If we cut state parks substantially in Thermopolis, if we're not able to support the hospitals or the Pioneer Home there, that means a lot to that community. And I think a lot of voters need to understand the consequences of cuts as we go. And we're not trying to just throw up the things that people say, oh my gosh, we can't do that. This is real serious conversation about what the structure and size of government needs to be. And I intend to deliver that message before we start coming back and saying, okay, we really feel that we need to support this particular program or this particular exercise. And that's where I think the revenue piece will come, and I will be there on that as well. But it's got to be necessary, it's got to be fair, and it's got to be understandable.
Governor, can I follow up? Will you
Sure.
bring forward cuts like in July? Are these going to be like a list of some massive things you might be looking at in the next few months, so people can get a little sense of what you're thinking? That might drive some of that conversation.
Yes, Bob, that's exactly right. I mean, we have to do some things now, and wonderful time to be governor, I suppose. But we'll have to do some things, and that's the intent of the July 1st. And they'll be consequential and substantial. I don't really want to give a range of percents, but roughly half of what 20% is, and they're going to be serious cuts. But from there, it's absolutely important because we're now, and I said this to the legislature and to my cabinet yesterday, I've been through across-the-board cuts. I know what they mean to some of our agencies and what they don't mean to other of the agencies. And I also know that at this point, across-the-board general fund cuts might actually mean that an agency pivots from what a mission that's essential to Wyoming to one that the federal government funds and we match just because the money's there. And we need to figure out if they're constitutionally mandated, if they're revenue generating exercises. These are things we've done before. If they're special funds or if they're general funds, we need to know if they're essential to Wyoming going forward. And that's the second stage, Bob, is when we're able to say, okay, here's what further cuts are going to look like. Now, let's weigh in on are these the right cuts to make? These are difficult times, and we'll have to make choices about. And I keep coming back to YDOT, but we are fairly far advanced in our review of the YDOT budget, so it's kind of comprehensive to me. Are we going to have to make some choices about whether towns are going to have to do more maintenance on their streets? Are we going to have to make some choices about who does the safety inspections of bridges? Are we going to have to make some choices about how many snowplow drivers do we have, or how much longer our rotary plows that are 30 years old are going to go? These are all questions that we have to deal with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Governor, this is Andrew with Wildfire. Can I ask a couple questions of Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks. Josh, I'm wondering if you can expand on why nonprofits were left out of the first round, because the legislature did not, in fact, exclude them in the bills that they passed, and many lawmakers, I think, were under the impression that nonprofits would be included.
Yeah, so I think it's less about being excluded in this program and more about this program being a really quick hit for those smallest businesses that were not able to get PPP and that were maybe named explicitly in those health orders so that they could get the funding immediately. So I don't really think of it as an exclusion from the entire program. I think of it as this particular first portion was intended to, again, help those really small businesses that were hurting. And again, as I mentioned, those will be considered for programs 2 and 3 where the bulk of the funding is. And so I hope to pick those up as we move forward. Good question, though. Thank you.
Thanks. Next question.
Yeah, I have to follow up there. I'm not sure if Josh caught it.
Oh, we didn't.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that small nonprofits cannot apply for this first round of funding, while small businesses can. That's right?
That is correct. That is correct. Only
and
for-profit
that was a
businesses.
decision made by the Business Council in rules making, right? That was not a legislative choice.
That is correct.
And can you expand on more on just why you made that decision?
Oh, absolutely. So the nonprofit landscape is a little bit interesting, first of all, and second of all, I think that while it was not included in the legislation, if you recall, the vote to exclude it was very close. It was within one vote. So we took it as while the vote to work for-profit businesses was essentially unanimous. And so we took that guidance and said, in this first program, in order to get it up and running in a quick fashion and keep it clean, we wanted to be able to do that in again, very, very fast fashion and get that $50 million out in the hands of small businesses. That was a key. The other key that we have to remember is that we don't know what the need is, frankly, within Wyoming. And we hope that this is enough, but we don't know if this $50 million will go in the first day or if it will last quite a bit longer. So we made that decision to, again, help those small businesses. That was essentially unanimous throughout both of the floors. Thank you.
And could you expand on the nonprofit landscape being interesting? And then I'm done. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I think that you could probably ask most nonprofits what they mean by interesting, and many of them that are lobbying groups and could be excluded from other programs in the federal government as well as other states are some of those reasons. So there are many different types of nonprofit organizations, and we just want to ensure that we are taking care of the ones that again, are best for the economic landscape of our towns and as well as the fabric of our communities. So great questions, and we'll be tackling those. Again, as I mentioned, we feel like it's key to do some really good outreach with nonprofits and ensure that we understand the nuances. As we've talked with nonprofits so far, even they say, look, we understand that this is a difficult process to go through, and it can be tricky with the different types of nonprofits that are out there. So let's do this carefully and methodically.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks. Next question. Well, let me thank you all for, again, your ability to communicate broadly in the state. These are difficult times and tough times. None more difficult than for the message that I just outlaid for our wonderful Wyoming employees. And for those watching or listening, these are your neighbors. These are the people whose kids go to school with yours. These are not just faces. They are people, and it is absolutely critical that we approach this crisis with compassion, with forethought, and with a view of where we're going to go. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do, working with the legislature together and with the people of Wyoming and our state employees. I'm almost speechless as I deliver these words, but it is essential. Even if we use our rainy day fund, we would only last about a year. And so these are serious cuts on top of the fact that everything that has supported us is in some ways being attacked. If it's oil and gas, if it's coal, if it's agriculture. These are all trends in this nation that we need to work to reverse. I will say that it was exciting that Wyoming opened Yellowstone Park earlier than, I think this week they're opening Rocky Mountain Park, but we opened Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming only 2 weeks ahead of any of our neighboring states. And we had only 200 fewer cars over Memorial Day. That means people are traveling. That means the opportunity for us to gain more sales tax revenue. It means our economy, we're helping to open it up. We're getting people moving again in this nation. And we're very hopeful, in a safe way, in a cautious way. We're very hopeful that this economic recovery will start to help allay some of the fears that we have. But I have to be honest, these are scary times. And so I thank you for paying attention. I thank you for being here today. And I hope you have a good weekend. Thanks.